Hello guys and welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about your frequently asked questions about the AMC MCQ. And today with us is a very special friend of mine, my mentor and a great colleague, as well as an educator and AMEX Review Course Coordinator, Dr. Isa Ibarola. Yahoo! Hi, Doc Isa!
Hi, Doc. Happy New
All right.
Year.
Yun. First of all, Doc Isa, I wish you and your family a very happy new year. And thanks so much
Wow.
for sitting with me and answering yung mga questions that I would ask of you. All right. Now, I cannot think of a better person to ask these questions than you. So, really, I'm very thankful. And I know this one will go well and will be very helpful for all of those international medical graduates hoping to practice here in Australia.
Oh, thanks naman, Doc Febs. Happy New Year to you, and I hope you and your family had a safe and wonderful New Year celebration.
Yeah, we did.
um,
We really did. Yeah.
thank you for the invite.
Yeah. So I think, Doc Isa, we should start our discussion regarding a general overview on the different pathways available for international medical graduates like me, all right, and for others hoping to practice here in Australia. All right?
So basically, well, generally speaking, there's three pathways, but as you know, there are a lot of like parang how do you say it? Complicated processes. But the basic ones would be just three pathways. One would be the competent authority pathway. That's the first one, and it's the pathway that allows reciprocity of your license. So I think one of the crucial terms that Filipino doctors have to understand is that a license, or the term license that we call here in the Philippines, is called a registration in Australia. Okay, so if they say there is reciprocity of registration, it just means that there is reciprocity of the license or the practice. No, and the competent authority pathway is a pathway that is given for doctors who had their med school training and their clinical training in the US, in the UK, in Ireland, in New Zealand. No? So these countries have reciprocity. But it's not enough that no the that you finish your med school there, or it's not enough that you have a med school diploma in those countries. You have to have training also in those countries. So a form of registration that is equivalent to a registration in Australia is a no is a requirement. So there are doctors who come to me and ask me na, I've done already the PLAB, doc. Is it reciprocal already to a registration in Australia? And the answer is no. If you haven't undergone training in the UK, the PLAB exams wouldn't, suffice for a registration. Okay. The second pathway, and the one also that's mostly asked, would be the specialist pathway. Of course, as the name implies, it's a pathway for specialists. So, for example, I'm a pediatrician here in the Philippines. If I want to practice as a pediatrician in Australia, then I can, look into the specialist pathway. Of course, the advantage is that if you really, really love your specialization, and you can't really see yourself practicing all the other all the other fields of medicine, and you really can't go back to the other
Yep.
fields,
Step one.
then yeah. So going through the specialist registration might be pricey and might take longer, but at the end of it, you'd be able to practice your specialization there in Australia.
So we've already discussed the competent pathway and the specialist pathway. Doc Isa, do you still have that PowerPoint presentation you give for
For
just an overview?
orientations,
Yep. For
yeah,
perhaps the standard pathway, if you don't mind.
yeah. When doctors inquire regarding the pathways, or when they have questions regarding the pathways, this is the picture or the infographic, I don't know, flow chart. I don't know what to call it. This is actually the image that I usually what do you call this, show them, and it's quite busy. But I think well, the basics of this, I made this so that at least everybody would have a bird's eye view of what the standard pathway is. The standard pathway is the most common pathway that is being done by Filipino IMGs. So the red ones that you have, that you see in this slide, would be exams. So all the red, or all the fonts with red marks, are exams. Okay. And then the ones on the boxes are registrations or licenses. So technically, you'll see here from this slide that it's not just one exam or two exams that you have to undergo through. It depends on what you want to take, what path you want to take. And in Australia, it's not just one license that you have, that you can have. There are three types of licenses or registrations that are, that are that are being given to Filipino or to IMGs, no, in general. Of course, you always start with the accounts, right? Your Epic and your AMC accounts. But of course, after you've gone through your Epic verifications and you have your AMC portfolio and you've paid already for the exam fee, the very first exam that you have to undertake is a step one exam, or the multiple choice question exam. Okay. Um, Also, take note that after passing the step one, you have the option already to look for work. So it's either a hospital work or an outpatient work. So another thing that doctors here in the Philippines have to understand also, that work there as a starting doctor is different, because a GP is considered as somebody managing the outpatient clinics, and the residents is somebody who is doing hospital work. Okay, so a lot of the doctors, well, in comparison, like here in the Philippines, when you say GP level, right? Like for me, for example, I'm a general physician. I could practice, do duties in a hospital, moonlight in a hospital, and do duties outpatient, right? But there in Australia, when you say you are a GP, well, on an entry level, no, starting wise, it's outpatient clinics that you have to do. Okay. And residents will have hospital work. So it's a two different structure. Okay. When you pass the step one, you can actually look for a job offer already. Okay. Um, Also, it's best to note that the English tests, your PTE, your TOEFL, your IELTS, no, they are not required for you to sit for the exam. Okay, not like the UK. I understand in the UK you have to do the English test
Yeah,
first, right?
IOPRA.
Yeah. But here in Australia, well, in the Australian pathway, it's not required for you to have your English test. The English test is only required when you are already looking for an
For the
employer.
job. Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
Okay. So my advice most of the time would be to just pass the step one first.
Mhm.
If you decide to look for an employer already, or to, go job hunting already, that's the time you take your English test. Okay? If you pass the step one, so if you follow through these purple lines, no, if you pass the step one and you have a job offer, that's the time that you are already eligible for a registration. And the
With APRA.
registration, yes, with APRA. No, the registration that you are eligible for would be a limited type of registration. And I think you're the best person to discuss that, what the
Yes,
limited registration employs, right? But technically, the lesson here is that there are two bodies that would regulate the exam and the license. It's not
yes.
like here in the Philippines that you have the PRC,
Who
right? You
does
have the
everything?
PRC who does the licenses, no? So
Yes,
after you do the
exam.
licensure exam, you were given your license already, right? And
Regis-
that's regulated by the PRC, right? But in Australia, you have to deal with the Australian Medical Council for the step one and the step two. But the registrations are being dealt with or are regulated by your APRA. And your APRA is your Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. So if you look into that statement, it just tells me, well, for me, it tells me that it's not enough that I pass my exam. No, if I do not have a job offer, I'm not eligible for a license.
That's true.
Okay? The exam and the job offer comes hand in hand for me to be eligible for a registration. If I just pass the exam and I do not have a job offer, I can't have a license or I can't have a registration. Okay?
Yep.
So that's the lesson of it. No?
And that's
So
true. That is very true because
mm-mm,
with the limited registration, well, I'll discuss it some other time. Just an overview.
yeah,
With the limited registration, since we are on a limited registration, we would need to have an employer vouching that they are going to supervise us. Because usually with
yeah,
limited registration, we are doctors in training, as in we need supervision. So, yep. But
yeah,
when you get
no,
into the general registration, yep, you're completely done for. Yes.
yeah, no. Yun. So, if you also follow through the purple arrows here, you'll notice that the purple arrow, doesn't lead to a provisional registration. No, and it leads to step two. Okay, so if, for example, you got a job offer and it's not in a hospital with a workplace-based assessment program, no, you still have to take the step two. Okay, when you pass the step two, then you are eligible for a provisional registration. So the difference of a limited registration and a provisional registration technically is just passing the step one or the step two. If
Yes.
you pass the step one, it's a limited registration for you. If you pass the step two, it's a provisional registration. Take note also that your provisional registration leads to a general registration. And the general registration is the goal. Actually, that's why I put this target here. It's the target of all IMGs, not just Filipinos. It's a target of all international medical graduates. Why? If you want to go into specialization training in Australia, you have to have a general registration. If you want to become a permanent resident, you have to have a general registration. So for migration purpose, this is your key, your general registration. And take note, you cannot go to from a limited registration to a general registration without passing through a provisional registration. So technically, when doctors do inquire with me, one question that I ask them is that, do you want the quickest way? Well, the one statement that I tell them is the quickest way to a general registration is to pass the step one, pass the step two, get a job offer, get a provisional registration. That's the quickest way. Okay. But of course, passing the step two and passing the step one would also involve, right, effort. Okay. Especially the step two. No.
Mm.
If you are if you if you want to work already, no, you can take the step one, take a resident medical officer position or a hospital work, take your limited registration, then prepare for step two. No, so I can't say until what time, right? I mean, like, there are people who would be under limited registration for 3 years before they take the step two,
Yeah.
2 or 3 years before they take the step two. Ganon.
Because three
No?
years is the maximum time you can renew your limited registration without having conditions. After three renewals of your limited registration, you would have those conditions under your medical registration, and it's not nice for the employers for you to have those. That's why the
Conditions.
employers themselves will urge you to take this
Yes.
too. Because
Yeah.
APRA will also tell their employers, hey, why aren't you telling your doctors in training to get into the clinicals, blah, blah, blah. Or say, for example, it's a hospital who offers the workplace-based assessment. APRA is going to tap the hospital like, hey, what's happening? Why is he or she isn't placed for workplace-based assessment? And mind you guys, workplace-based assessment, especially in the city, more so on the institution
On
that I'm
your
in,
institution,
it's
yeah.
very competitive. And I think the main purpose of this conversion of license, these examination, these workplace-based assessment, not is not only to test if our knowledge of medicine is in equivalence to the Australian level of knowledge, but what it tests actually is how safe we are as practitioners
Yeah.
because they have
Correct.
to take care of their people.
Yeah.
They
Mhm.
can't be held liable for hiring someone who is at subpar level and treating their, people, their community.
Yeah. So it's a way of regulating, right, the doctors.
Definitely.
Um And it's also a way of of safeguarding the health of the public, right?
True, that's true.
Um yeah. Yeah. So but as looking just through this slide, you'll know that there are a lot of pathways that you can go into. But yeah, it's just that there are, for some, they might want to decide on taking the step one and looking for work, have
Yep.
a limited registration and prepare for step two. That's one. For some, if let's say I I know somebody who says that, doc, I can't focus. If I'm working, I can't focus on the exam. So my plan, and there's no other plan, is to pass the step one, pass the step two, moonlight in the Philippines, and get a job offer.
Yep.
Have my practice recent, and then get a job offer so that I get a provisional registration. Ganon.
Yeah.
That's one. The others would be like you. Like, take the step one, get an RMO, get into a WBA program, right? So that I don't have to take the step two. Di ba?
Because my mind just can't. I can't study anymore.
Oh,
No
yeah,
more studying.
right. So, yeah, there are a lot of strategies.
Mhm.
There are a lot of strategies, right? So if you're motivated enough and you really look into your strategy, it's just um there is no question for success
Yes,
in this journey. Yeah.
definitely. If there's a will, there's a way. Doc Isa, before I let go of this slide, I just wanted to tell you something. One thing I've learned with a limited registration, you can go ahead with being or having a general registration once you finish the workplace based assessment program and you hit those core rotations,
Rotations.
this 1 year rotations required
Yeah.
by APRA, then you can be eligible or you can be granted an AMC certificate saying that you're eligible for a general registration. It's not always mandatory for limited, provisional, and general. Most especially
Yeah.
with WBA programs because sometimes the waiting time would have to be a year or two. Therefore, the RMOs are able to hit those target rotations.
Rotations.
So once they complete the workplace-based assessment, they can go directly to general
Yes.
registration.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
So the WBA program is quite special, in
It's
a sense
special.
that, in a sense that it's an alternative. It's an alternative for the step two.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks so much for that, Doc Isa. This has been, you know, do doing very well. Now, just a couple of tips for our watchers or for our viewers. If you think you guys have any other questions, clarifications, I think it would be best to direct your questions to AMC or to APRA themselves, just so you would have a more definite and a more solid answer. And of course, you would have documentation that, hey, this is what you told me the first time, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, Doc Febs, I forgot to mention, we were talking about the hospital work all this time,
Mm.
and we failed to mention the GP, the
Yeah.
GP process, which is actually, it's a whole process of its own, the GP pathway. But just uh, a summary of it is that when you pass the step one, and if you have like an ample work experience, meaning to say like 4 or 5 years GP work experience here in the Philippines, you can actually look for a job offer in the GP setup. So you just look for a GP employer. However, it's not enough that you have an employer already. You have to take your pre-employment structured clinical interview, or your PESC. No?
Yeah.
So in the GP setup, it's quite complicated in the sense that you have to pass an exam, you have to have a job offer, and you have to pass a pesky for you to get a registration. Okay. It's not like in the hospital setup wherein you pass the step one and you get the job offer, then you get a registration. So in the GP pathway, it's a whole different process. It's a whole different preparation also. But yeah, summary wise, you have to pick, if you are not a general registration holder, you have to have a pesky so that you're eligible for any registration as a GP.
Yeah. And I think our viewers can also, watch my other videos.
Yeah, with
There
Doc
was one
Jason.
with Doc Jason, who's amazing, by the way. who is
Yeah.
one Filipino I'm very proud of for being a GP here in Australia. And I think our fellow Filipinos could look into that. And for those who are non Filipino speaking, I promise I'm going to make a caption of that very, very soon. I am very sorry, you guys. Soon, 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 I'll be making that up. So I think, Dokisa, it's about time for us to move on to our next question.